Heather Collins was supposed to be just another name in Gerald Dean's journal, a forgotten victim in a long, calculated string of disappearances. But her muffled scream, barely audible through the walls of a quiet suburban home, became the thread that unraveled Gerald's monstrous double life. What began as a single, almost dismissed noise led police to a discovery so horrific it would shock the entire nation and expose a predator who had hunted silently for over 2 decades. It was a bitterly cold Thursday night in the sleepy suburb of Ashwood Hills, a place where porch lights glowed like quiet stars and neighbors rarely locked their doors. Around 11:30 p.m., a woman named Linda Carver was walking her aging Labrador Daisy along Willow Creek Road. The wind howled through the barren trees, and most homes were already dark. As she passed a quiet 2-story house with peeling white paint and drawn curtains, something made her stop. At first, she thought it was nothing, just the creaks of an old house or the wind pressing against the siding. But then she heard it again, a faint, muffled sound like someone shouting into a pillow. It lasted only a second, barely more than a gasp, but it tightened something deep in her chest. Daisy froze too, ears perked. Linda strained to listen again, but the noise didn't return. She looked up at the house, noticed the porch light was off, and remembered she had never seen anyone outside that home in all the years she'd lived there. Feeling uneasy but not wanting to overreact, she made a mental note and continued her walk. The next morning, she couldn't shake the feeling. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. So she called the non-emergency police line, reporting what she described as an unusual cry or scream coming from the property the night before. The operator thanked her and said they would send a car to check it out. For a town like Ashwood Hills, where crimes were limited to the occasional stolen bike, this was already significant. The responding officers arrived later that morning. The house in question was located at 27 Willow Creek Road, nestled between 2 well-maintained homes. Its lawn was overgrown, the mailbox was crammed with old letters, and a rusted sedan sat in the driveway with cobwebs in the wheel wells. The officers knocked several times with no answer. They peeked through the windows and saw only darkness and clutter. Everything about the house felt forgotten, abandoned, yet not entirely empty. Because there were no signs of immediate danger, they left a card and marked it for follow-up. But something gnawed at one of the officers. He requested a welfare check and within a few hours obtained a warrant to enter the home. When they returned that afternoon and stepped inside, the first thing that hit them was the smell, a thick, nauseating mix of mildew, rot, and something else more sinister. The home was dim, filled with random piles of furniture, newspapers, and locked doors. Every hallway felt claustrophobic. The air was stale and the silence was deafening. They found the kitchen untouched with expired food in the fridge. Dust clung to every surface, but one door stood out, a basement door with 3 sliding bolts mounted on the outside. It wasn't just locked, it was sealed. That was the moment the officers realized they weren't dealing with a routine welfare check. Something inside that house had been kept hidden, locked away behind layers of silence and shadows. And whatever had made that muffled scream might still be alive. Or worse. The officers hesitated at the basement door, the 3 heavy bolts suggesting more than just privacy. It was containment. The silence beyond it was thick, unwelcoming, as though the house itself was holding its breath. One of the officers called for backup, while the other began photographing the door and surrounding area. The floorboards creaked under their feet, and cobwebs dangled from the ceiling like warning signs. When the backup unit arrived, they used a crowbar to unseal the basement door. It groaned open slowly, revealing a steep staircase that descended into darkness. The air that escaped was damp, tinged with iron and decay. With flashlights drawn, they descended step by cautious step. The light from above faded quickly, swallowed by the shadows below. The single bulb at the bottom flickered when they pulled its chain, casting a dim yellow glow across the room. The basement was more of a dungeon than a storage area. Thick, soundproofing foam covered the walls and ceiling, The floor was bare concrete, stained in places and cold underfoot. In the center of the room sat a metal chair, bolted to the floor, equipped with leather restraints that were cracked and discolored from age and use. Near it lay a grimy mattress, flattened and soaked in dark blotches. A rusted bucket sat in the corner, half filled with what appeared to be dirty water. The officers moved slowly, taking photographs and calling in forensic support. One of them opened a small wooden cabinet on the far side of the basement and found duct tape, syringes, plastic ties, and a variety of pills with labels scratched off. Alongside these items was a purse, dusty but intact. Inside was a driver's license belonging to Heather Collins, a 28-year-old woman who had gone missing 6 weeks earlier after leaving work late from her job at a local cafe. Her disappearance had rattled the community, but produced no suspects or leads. The discovery of her ID now changed everything. Suddenly, what began as a noise complaint had transformed into a potential kidnapping scene and possibly something worse. The forensic team quickly arrived and began cataloging the evidence. The foam on the walls was tested and confirmed to be commercial-grade acoustic material, the type used in music studios or interrogation rooms, designed to prevent sound from escaping. That explained why the muffled scream had been so faint, and why no one else in the neighborhood had heard anything for weeks or even months. A quick sweep of the rest of the basement revealed scratch marks on the underside of the stair railing and a small pile of fingernails near the mattress. Above the chair, a hook hung from the ceiling, with an old chain dangling loosely from it. The implications were deeply disturbing. And yet, there was no sign of Gerald Dean, the homeowner, anywhere in the house. His car was still in the driveway, but no trace of him could be found upstairs, in the basement, or on the property. Only the horrors he left behind remained, silent and waiting to be understood. As investigators dug deeper into the house, what they discovered went far beyond a single kidnapping. With the basement secured, they began searching the rest of the home for anything that might lead to Gerald Dean's whereabouts or the fate of Heather Collins. What they found instead were signs of long-term, calculated deception. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they discovered an old suitcase filled with women's jewelry, hairbrushes, and photographs, none of which belonged to Heather. Each item was carefully labeled with dates going back more than 10 years. Police began to fear they weren't dealing with a one-time offender, but a long-active predator who had operated unnoticed for years. Behind a bookcase in the hallway, officers noticed a gap in the drywall. On closer inspection, they found the frame was not solid. With tools, they pried open the back of the case, revealing a narrow passage behind the wall. It led to a hidden room, no larger than a closet, with thick padding on every surface and no windows. Inside was a single bare bulb, a wooden chair with frayed straps, and several small boxes stacked in the corner. Each box was labeled with a set of initials. Inside the boxes were disposable phones, USB drives, and handwritten journals. The journals were disturbing. They read like logs, clinical, detached, methodical. Each entry contained a name or set of initials, physical descriptions, dates of abduction, behavioral notes, and disturbing phrases like held for 9 days, resisted sedation, or disposed of efficiently. These were not stories or fantasies. They were real records of events. Some entries had photos paper-clipped to the pages, showing terrified women bound or unconscious. The photos were dated, and many corresponded to actual missing persons reports from surrounding counties. The discovery triggered a flurry of phone calls to local and state authorities. A special task force was formed within hours. Crime scene analysts spent the next several days combing every inch of the house. In the attic, another chilling find was made. A large plastic storage bin filled with charred bone fragments. Forensic experts determined that the remains were human and showed signs of burning and crushing. Preliminary analysis indicated they belonged to at least 2 different people, neither of whom matched Heather Collins. Gerald Dean's past was re-examined. He had lived alone in that house for over 20 years. He had no close relatives, no consistent employment history, and minimal digital presence. For the past decade, he had been receiving checks from a mysterious trust fund, the origin of which couldn't be immediately traced. Interviews with neighbors painted the picture of a quiet, distant man, never hostile, but always withdrawn. He rarely spoke, and no one remembered ever seeing visitors at his home. What had once seemed like a quiet life of solitude was now clearly a carefully constructed disguise. Gerald had hidden behind it for years while constructing a nightmare beneath his feet. And somewhere, out in the world, he was still free, possibly planning to disappear forever. But the most urgent question remained. If Heather wasn't in the house, where was she? The discovery of Heather Collins's belongings in the basement ignited a desperate search across state lines. Authorities scrambled to issue bulletins with Gerald Dean's photo, tracking financial records, CCTV footage, and toll booth data. For days, there was no sign of him. Then, a tip came in from a gas station attendant in a remote area near Deep Hollow Forest, nearly 80 miles from Ashwood Hills. The man claimed a disheveled individual, matching Gerald's description, had stopped to buy canned food, duct tape, and bottled water. Security footage confirmed the sighting. More alarming was the timestamp, just 48 hours earlier. A search party was immediately dispatched to the surrounding woods. The Deep Hollow area was known for its thick forest and scattered hunting cabins, many of them long abandoned. Officers canvassed the region on foot and by drone. On the second day of the search, a Sheriff A.S. deputy noticed a faint trail of tire marks leading off a rarely used gravel path. Following the tracks led them to a dilapidated cabin half swallowed by overgrown branches and leaves. The windows were boarded up from the inside, and the door was reinforced with chains and a sliding bar. With weapons drawn, officers breached the door and stormed inside. The interior was small, cluttered, and reeked of rot. A makeshift bed was pushed into one corner, surrounded by canned food and empty water bottles. There were blood-stained sheets, worn restraints, and signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, scratches on the window panes, and a broken radio. But Gerald wasn't there. The cabin was empty, yet the atmosphere was heavy with recent activity. In the back, a closet had been converted into a holding space. It had thick blankets, a pan for waste, and a single broken handcuff attached to a metal pipe. Outside, just behind the cabin, a shallow patch of disturbed earth caught the attention of a cadaver dog. Officers began digging immediately. Moments later, they uncovered a blue tarp wrapped tightly around what appeared to be a human body. When they peeled it back, they discovered a woman, barely breathing, bruised, and severely malnourished. It was Heather. Medics rushed her to the nearest hospital by helicopter. Doctors were astonished that she was still alive. Her body showed signs of starvation, prolonged physical abuse, and dehydration. She drifted in and out of consciousness, but was stable. She had no memory of how long she had been in the cabin. In her brief moments of clarity, she repeated only one phrase. He said he'd come back. Heather's rescue was a miracle, but it raised further fears. Gerald had clearly fled just before the search team arrived. Investigators believed he had been watching from the woods and escaped through one of the many deer trails winding through the forest. A statewide manhunt intensified overnight. Roadblocks were set up, drone surveillance was expanded, and additional units from neighboring states joined the effort. Despite the pressure, Gerald continued to evade capture. But now, authorities had a living survivor, a timeline, and evidence that would link him to years of horrors. What had started with a single muffled scream had now become a race to stop a man whose secrets were still being unearthed. 3 days after Heather was rescued, Gerald Dean was caught trying to board a freight ship leaving from a private dock in a coastal town nearly 200 miles away. He was using a fake passport and had changed his appearance, cutting his hair, dyeing his beard, and wearing oversized clothes to appear older and more frail. Despite the disguise, a dock worker recognized him from a wanted poster taped inside a local diner. The worker alerted authorities quietly, stalling Gerald by pretending there was an issue with his boarding paperwork. Within 30 minutes, federal agents and local police surrounded the ship and arrested him without resistance. He said nothing. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He simply stared at the ground as if it were already over. Back in Ashwood Hills, the public reaction was a mix of shock, fear, and disgust. No one could believe that someone who had lived among them for so long had committed such horrors. Investigators worked around the clock to connect the dots. Over the following weeks, forensic analysts reviewed the journals found in the hidden room, the contents of the USB drives, and the disturbing cache of bones discovered in the attic. The data uncovered a chilling reality. Gerald had been hunting for over 2 decades. His victims came from different towns, different backgrounds, and different walks of life, but each had vanished without a trace. Most were never reported missing because they had been living in vulnerable conditions, runaways, transient workers, or estranged from family. Gerald was charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, and at least 3 confirmed counts of homicide based on the remains identified. As the trial approached, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Prosecutors had digital files, journal entries in his own handwriting, forensic matches, and testimony from Heather, who, after weeks of recovery and therapy, was strong enough to take the stand. She gave a powerful account of her captivity, describing the psychological torment, the isolation, and how she stayed alive by holding on to hope that someone would find her. Her testimony was broadcast across the nation and turned her into an unexpected symbol of resilience and survival. But it was Gerald's confession that stunned everyone. During a closed-door session with investigators, he admitted to at least 11 abductions, though he refused to name all his victims. He claimed his motive was not rage or revenge, but curiosity. He viewed the women as subjects, not people. He had studied how to erase them, socially, digitally, physically, and for years, it worked. He knew which trails to cover, how to break a victim's will, and how to dispose of a body without leaving evidence. His knowledge came from years working at a funeral home, where he learned about decomposition, cremation, and body concealment techniques. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gerald showed no emotion. The case sparked national debates about the tracking of missing adults and led to reforms in how police handle cases of vulnerable or low-priority victims. Heather went on to advocate for survivors, helping form a foundation to support families of the missing. What began with a sound barely heard in the night had revealed a decades-long nightmare. Gerald Dean had been hiding in plain sight, but his final secret, buried in screams no longer ignored, had finally been brought to light.